The Last of the Mohicans, Chapter 8. The Massacre at William Henry. For a moment, Montcalm stood frozen in his hiding place. Then, with his cloak flying wildly behind him, he dashed forward and shoved the barrel of Le Renard's rifle toward the ground. Grabbing the Indian by the shoulder, he pulled him back into the trees. "What is the meaning of this?" Montcalm cried in exasperation. "Don't you know the hatchet is buried behind the English and the French?" "The pale faces make friends now," answered the redskin, "and not one of my warriors has a scalp." "That doesn't matter," Montcalm retorted. "You are pledged not to attack the friends of France." "I am a great chief," Le Renard cried. "I will have my revenge for the marks Monroe left on me. You will see." With that, he whirled and ran back toward the Iroquois encampment. There was a frown on Montcalm's face as he too retraced his steps back to his tent, echoed with the marching music of the French grenadiers as they began their procession to William Henry at dawn. The change of command took place with dignity and decorum. The English and Americans made a brave attempt to conceal their wounded pride as the French flag was raised high above the fort, and the French on their part refrained from any behavior that might have been interpreted as taunting or condescending. But Colonel Monroe's grief was apparent to all. Stern and proud, he led his columns out the gates, giving up his last claim on the fort. Hayward and the women and children followed behind, while the wounded brought up the rear. Along the sweeping borders of the forest hung a dark cloud of Iroquois. They eyed the passage of their enemies like hovering vultures who were kept from swooping upon their prey by the presence of the French. However, when the colorful swirl of one of the English women attracted the eyes of a wild Iroquois, he went to grab it, and trouble erupted. "Let him have it," Cora cried as the woman pulled her shawl closer. But the advice came too late. In a violent fit of rage, the Indian raised his tomahawk and killed the woman and the child she was clutching in her arms. At that instant, Le Renard placed his hands over his mouth and began a series of war whoops that drew a seemingly endless stream of thousands of savages from the forest. Tomahawks and knives flew in every direction, and screams and yells resounded from one end of the plain to the other. Death was everywhere, and the Indians slaughtered men, women, and children in their path. Cora, standing riveted to the spot, waved in vain to her father, who streaked by her in his fruitless search for Montcalm. At her feet lay the unconscious form of her sister. Just as she and David Gamut stopped to revive Alice, the shadow of a sinister intruder fell over them. "Le Renard," cried Cora, looking up. "My wigwam is still open," he said, fingering her dress with his dirty hands. "It is not better than this place," he laughed loudly as he held up his blood-stained hands. "Monster!" she shrieked. "You, and you alone, are responsible for starting this bloody massacre." Le Renard ignored her remark. "Are you ready now to travel to my village?" "Never!" Never, she cried, backing away from him in horror. In horror. As she spoke, the Iroquois scooped up Alice's limp body and headed toward the forest. Unwilling to abandon Alice without a struggle, Cora and David flew after him, making their way through the wounded and dead on the plain. When they reached the first pine grove, Leonard caught Cora in his arms and carried her, kicking and screaming, to his horse, forcing her to mount and ride behind the unconscious Alice. He led his horse deep into the forest. David Gamut, huffing and puffing, followed behind them. It was not until several hours later that Colonel Monroe and Hayward, aided by Hawkeye and the Mohicans, were able to begin the search for Cora and Alice. It was Uncas who actually led them to the pine grove, where they discovered Cora's riding veil dangled from a limb. "What does this mean?" asked Monroe, wildly, as he crushed the veil in his hands. "What has happened to my daughters?" "Well, if they have gone alone, they are quite likely moving in a circle nearby. But if the Iroquois have captured them, then they are probably headed for the Canadian border," Hawkeye explained grimly. "Look, over here," interrupted Chingachgook. "Here are the prints of Leonard moccasins. And here's David Gamut's pitch pipe," yelled Hayward, pulling the object out of a briar patch. "Thank God he stayed with them. But where is Alice?" "I'm afraid there is no sign of her yet," answered Hawkeye. "But never fear, sir. We will not give up." An excited cry from Uncas, kneeling beneath the fir tree, brought the whole party running. The Mohicans rose to his feet and held up a ruby pendant that glittered brightly in the late afternoon sun. "It's Alice's," Hayward exclaimed as he grabbed it and held it against his heart. "I remember seeing it around her neck when she rode out this morning." "There's no doubt about it, then, Hawkeye. Then, there's no doubt about it, then," Hawkeye told Monroe and Hayward. "They have been carried into captivity by Le Renard Subtil." The old man fell to his knees in agony. "Dear God, have mercy on them," he wept. "You must not give up hope," said Hawkeye, putting his arm around the colonel's shoulder. "Being captive is a far sight better than starving in the wilderness, and they will leave a wide trail for us to follow. Now, I will wager you 50 beaver skins that the Mohicans and I will enter the Iroquois tents before the month is over." That was the last of the Mohicans. That was chapter 8. That was chapter 8. I'm gonna get ready to read chapter 9.